to the Afternoon Constitutional. My name is Joe Thomas on behalf of our sponsors, the Government Accountability and Oversight Group, govoversight.org. It figures the smoke finally leaves Central Virginia, and now I get a frog in my throat. Thank you for joining us here, and thank you for tuning in or sharing this whenever you get the program live at 3 weekdays. And don't forget, we're getting ready for a series of very special live broadcasts on location for this program. That's a first for us. So we're going to be at Freedom Fest in Memphis 1 week from today, and tomorrow 1 week from yesterday, too. So a lot going on at Freedom Fest in Memphis, the world's greatest gathering of free minds. freedomfest.com. Get your tickets. There's still some room in Memphis, although I think the Elvis trip is booked up. But otherwise, it's some great stuff. As I said, it's me, Mike Rowe, Mike Lee, and a cast of thousands, including a fella who has won some very heady endorsements, including from our first guest. We'll have presidential candidates from the Libertarian Party, the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party at Freedom Fest. Freedom Fest, which launched Donald Trump's campaign in 2015. Will it do the same for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? One wonders, but he'll be there. I think he is speaking on Saturday. Today's program is about injunctions and how you can have an injunction for something that months ago we were told was never happening. How could you possibly have an injunction against something that doesn't happen? That's conspiracy theory stuff. So to join us to talk about the injunction that stops the federal government, the executive branch of the federal government, from throttling, from discussing, from manipulating your social media reports is Dr. Pierre Kory from the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance. Dr. Kory, it's great to see you again. How are you doing, sir?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Well, and I'm taking a big risk because the last time we had the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance, I got my first strike from our YouTube channel, and we haven't wandered out. I think Dr. Marek was on, and we were telling the world that we were going to talk about all the great treatments you guys have come up with, both for preventing COVID, for treating people with COVID, and for treating people who have had an experimental injection in their arm, and all these protocols, and that was apparently a no-no. But now with this injunction, we should be safe now, Dr. Kory, correct?
Oh, the way I see that injunction, I think it's important, right? It's telling the government, as if you had to tell the government to not, collude and coerce private companies to censor. And that's what that ruling came out. But Joe, you and I both know that doesn't stop private companies from doing it. The people controlling those companies, I think they were directed by government, but they still have the same objectives. I don't think the censoring is going to stop. They can do whatever they want, and they've been going after us since the beginning.
Well, then let me ask you this, because, I certainly see where, you will see creative government officials and they'll start working back channel deals the same way they collude with China and Russia and all the other, World Economic Forum nations to keep people from speaking about medical treatments of all things. I mean, this was the craziest thing in the world, is that this was all being done over medical treatments, and that's the real off-putting part for anyone, I think, in this. If you dispatch the whole politics of it and whose vaccine it was and what company, if you just simply boiled it down to somebody coming up to you on your street and saying you can't discuss chicken soup with your neighbor anymore because it's not an approved FDA treatment for the common cold. That's where we were, weren't we, Dr. Kory?
Joe, I think it's so important that people recognize. So, for instance, what I'll say is this. In my entire medical career, I have never been told I couldn't use a medicine, ever, ever. Well, there's one rare exception. In the hospital, the medication intravenous Tylenol was highly restricted only because of cost. So if you wanted to use it because someone couldn't take something orally, or they couldn't absorb, you had to get permission because of the cost, but that was it. It wasn't like you can't use it, you just needed
Right.
permission.
Sure,
That was
and
it.
that's the bean counters. They
Yeah,
always get in the way of the doctor,
exactly.
right?
But it was clear why that was had some restriction around. But people have to remember that traditionally in medicine, the only thing that really was a barrier or a guardrail to your practice was the risk of being accused of malpractice, right? So if you did something, let's say that was off of a guideline, or the agencies or authorities didn't recommend, you carried that responsibility. Meaning, if you did something that either didn't work or hurt someone, you're now at risk of malpractice. And that's also why many doctors are traditionally cautious, because they want to kind of follow rules, because they never want to be accused of stepping outside those. But here you had a novel disease with newly discovered mechanisms, pathologic mechanisms, for which we knew of many treatments that held hope of treating, and many doctors doctored, meaning they used their best judgment using a nice analysis of benefits versus risk, and they went ahead and started treating, and we started to discover things worked. We were finding compounds and medicines that were highly effective. But then all of a sudden, we're getting attacked, losing our licenses, losing jobs. And when we try to speak about what we're discovering about the efficacy of these therapies, we're getting censored on social media. And Joe, you mentioned at the beginning that, like, when Paul, my partner, was on with you, like, I think you got a strike from YouTube. I mean,
Yeah.
early on in the pandemic, YouTube has a community policy, which essentially, I'm just going to paraphrase here: thou shalt not speak about hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Like,
So
literally,
right.
literally, that is their policy. Like, if you speak about it, you get shot down. I once did an interview with Matt Taibbi, a very
Hmm.
well-known journalist, and I don't think he got ivermectin right. It was about ivermectin, but in his article, he called me the ghost of the internet, because wherever I went, like, things disappeared, like things were taken down. And let me also give you an example of how bad it's gotten. So I have a number of areas of expertise prior to COVID, one of which is the use of intravenous vitamin C in sepsis or septic shock.
Hmm.
And I was invited to a vitamin C conference maybe 4 months ago in Florida. I gave a lecture based on all of my old research and knowledge, didn't mention COVID, didn't mention ivermectin. The organizer of the conference put it up on YouTube. This is a lecture on IV vitamin C, taken down within an hour.
Vitamin
Within
C.
an hour. Vitamin C, intravenous. It was taken down within an hour. So, I mean, the censorship is raging, but I think the point I want to make, and I think you're bringing up too, is that people have to understand that the world changed in fundamentally and large ways with COVID. Like, again, I've never been restricted to do anything. Now, medicine is so locked down. The doctors are all scared. Nobody will go off protocol. No one will try something new if someone's deteriorating despite standard treatment. Like, I taught medicine for years, and I had kind of two principles that I would teach my
Hmm.
students and residents and fellows. And one of which was, you know, if what you're doing is working, keep doing what you're doing. Meaning, you don't have to do new tests, you don't have to change treatments. Like, if they're on a positive trajectory, just stay confident and keep doing that.
Sure.
But the converse was, if what you're doing is not working, change what you're doing.
Hmm.
And I started to hear reports of families in distress because their family members were coming into hospitals. They're on the standard nonsense of remdesivir and this tiny dose of steroids. They're deteriorating, and the doctors are just holding up their hands.
They
Like, if
can't
I
do
was the
anything.
doctor in that system, I'd be trying a bunch of stuff, high dose IV vitamin C, a whole bunch of other host
Sure.
of medicines. But in that system now, Joe, you can't do it. I mean, I'm not in that system anymore, but the doctors, I know they can't do stuff that are off protocol and guidelines. They've captured the entire field of medicine.
Well, and then the question then becomes to me, Dr. Corey, why go to medical school for that long if you're just following a guideline book? I mean, gosh, I used to run a fast food restaurant. I'd give a kid a stack of video cassettes for him to watch and a book saying how hot a Whopper is supposed to be. And oops. I think I gave away what fast food restaurant it is. But anyway, and within a week or two, I could have a kid feeding 1,000 people during lunch hour. So it sounds like that's what the medical profession is devolving into. So spare all these kids 9, 10 years of education. Just tell them follow the rule book and put a white coat on.
And it's unfortunate that what you say, I think, is largely, I think there is still some latitude in free thinking medicine, but it's been so greatly diminished. I agree. I don't think it would be an attractive field to go into. I mean, just to learn how to do
That's
something by
scary.
rote. I mean, what about the art of medicine?
Hmm.
I have a degree in mathematics. I love problem solving. I thought of my patients as people, but I also thought of their problems, and I was always trying to figure out their problems. And I didn't care where my thoughts led me. If I had a good sense that this is what they could benefit from, or this is what I should
Hmm.
do, I did it. And I was constantly learning the new strategies and ways to solve those problems. Now, the doctors just sit there and they wait till the journals or some stupid, biased, massively funded trial tells them to use drug A, which is generally a pricey pharmaceutical. It's
Well,
it's it's absurd.
Well, and that's the part that really I think has a lot of the American populace questioning this because after a bit we start to find the corridors in this rabbit warren, and we're seeing them all come back to a connection where the president or the executive branch of the government is telling people to throttle back information that might have you going to some generic $5 a pill drug rather than $1,000 a shot for a pharmaceutical company. And I understand pharmaceutical companies spend a lot of money in research and development to develop something. But my gosh, what happened to science? Science was supposed to be about questioning. The mere phrase "the science is settled," Dr. Corey, is antithetical to what I was always taught was science.
100%. Science isn't static. There's nothing settled. We're always trying to figure things out, make developments, question. Even you're supposed to question settled science, which is
Mhm.
how settled is it?
Right.
Myself and Paul Marek, who you've interviewed before. I mean, he's famous in his career before COVID of upending orthodoxies, settled strategies for treating different conditions. When he dove deep and looked at the actual foundational science, he found that different conclusions could be reached. So you're right, science really is about questioning, skepticism, constantly testing, and that's how you make advances. But now we're told to we're told from above that it's settled and this is how you do it and you can't do anything different. You know, it's
Well,
strange. So, highlights what you just put out, right?
mhm.
So I
I
wrote
don't
the
want to
book.
get into that, but yeah, go ahead. Finish what you're
No,
saying
I
about
just
me.
want to say, like in my book, I detail how those practices, how that control and capture has been exerted, and all of the levers that they've captured now and that they use, from high impact medical journals to research trials that are so heavily biased, what gets published in journals and what doesn't, how guidelines are formed, how those people are put on those committees to make those guidelines. It is absolutely overwhelmingly conflicted, and pharma, the power of pharma is almost indescribable. I mean, they are the largest lobby on Capitol Hill.
Hmm.
They're 2 to 3 times the size of coal and gas on
Oh
Capitol
my
Hill. I mean,
gosh.
in 2021, they gave lobbying budget averaged out to 660,000 per member of Congress.
What? Oh my gosh.
660,000 per member.
That's well, and you talk about coal and gas, and we see the war that's going on there over this, but it's got to be close to a breaking point. I mean, I know people of both political parties who are like, "All right, this is just a bridge too far." They're ready to abandon, all hope. I mean, I'm afraid for our political system because they've lost so much faith in that system, and I'm trying desperately to save the underpinnings of the system and say, listen, just some corrupt actors doesn't mean the whole system is ruined. We just need to fix the places where they wrote their little loopholes and end arounds to get around it. So talk about what the work you're doing, the work I see in the different alternatives to the way medical care has been delivered, the direct primary care
Yep.
associations, and the folks who are working, around all the regulatory red tape in medicine. I want to talk about the book, The War on Ivermectin, coming up some more as well. But given the people have to know that medicine and medical people want to be healers, not just distributors of pharmaceuticals, don't they?
Yeah, no, and that's a good question. So, I mean, When I talked about those levers before, another one that I didn't mention is like the medical boards and the boards of different specialties, the state licensing boards as well as the specialty boards, they've come after us too. And so the solution to your question, right, is what we've discovered, many of us I'm going to use the word, we've been excommunicated. I mean, I used to be at the top of academics. I mean, I was the
Hmm.
chief of the critical care service at the University of Wisconsin. I was the director of their main ICU. I taught, I published, I lectured widely. And now I'm unemployable because of seemingly my expertise differs with their experts. And so I'm out. But the answer is building parallel systems.
Hmm.
And so to your question, so right now, a year and a half ago, I built a private practice. I have my work as a, director of a nonprofit with the FLCCC, but I also I still doctor. I specialize in the treatment of vaccine injury and long COVID. And my practice is drpierrecorey.com. But what's important, Joe, is that practice I brought under the jurisdiction of the Crow Indian tribe because the Crow Indian tribe has a federal level statute construct which protects tribal practitioners. So I'm now a registered tribal
Oh.
practitioner. My practice is under their jurisdiction. So any patient that sees me, they actually have to join the Crow tribe. It's like $35 for a year. And once they become a member of the Crow tribe, that relationship between me and my patient is protected under what's called the First Nations Medical Board. And so if there's an issue or concern of anything I do or say, you bring it to the tribal council. I'm no longer under the jurisdiction of the state. But do you understand the extent that I had to go in order to practice
I
medicine
know.
in the freedom that you just described? I mean, otherwise, the prescriptions I would write if I tried to do retail pharmacies, I mean, I would get harassed. And I mean, it is about parallel systems. And I have to tell you, a number of my colleagues, we are in direct primary care. Unfortunately, I don't accept insurance because I can't. So it's fee based, so it's not going to be available to everybody. But um, I don't know how else to practice medicine in this environment, in this world, and the way they captured medicine.
Well, I understand. That's the part that I think is frightening because when people are sick, and I still say there's part of this that if the government's response was righteous, I'll make that a very long shot. Then there were large numbers of things we weren't and have not been told about the novel coronavirus, why the reaction had to be what it was. But failing to find out any of that, when we find out that the government is throttling information about inexpensive treatments in exchange for expensive ones, when they're hiding vaccine data in the same way they've been hiding vaccine data and allowing vaccine manufacturers to not live up to their own contracts for decades now. The workarounds have to be the. I just noticed my producer changed your graphic to say "medicine man" under it now that you're working for the. These are the sad things that we have to do. Is that we have to find ways to circumvent our representative government, which seems like it's no longer even bothering to represent us anymore. It's representing a very small oligarchic little group of folks. Dr. Corey, is that what your sense is as well?
Well, that's what I've come to discover. I mean, I used to be, I guess, a liberal or even a Democrat, but I used to believe in the concept of good government, making things fair for the population, for society, bring about some equity of opportunity of resources. Now, over the last 3 years, not only have I undergone a transformation and intellectual discovery of really how medicine's been captured and controlled and corrupted. But when I look at the government's behavior, I mean, we literally live in what I believe now is a corporate fashion state. I no longer believe in good
Hmm.
government, at least in the state that it's in now.
Yeah.
Those politicians are not really politicians. They don't really have power in the way that we think they do. And everything is just being done in the interest of corporate interests, which are most of the time diametrically the opposite of the interest of the public.
Hmm.
It is to serve a very small segment and to create profits and customers and all of those things. And it's sad because I think back to last century when government did some really pretty great things.
Yep.
That's
Well,
now they're doing they're doing things that are literally, and I hate to sound if I sound unhinged, but I'm seeing immense amounts of death
Mhm,
occurring as
mhm.
the result of government action. It's, one of my colleagues, Ed Dowd, I mean, he uses the term democide, which is death by government.
Yeah,
And
it
we're
is.
seeing that routinely. And the way they have the media, it's whitewashed. You pretend it's this normal or just some tragic event or
Mhm.
unfortunate occurrences, but it's literally, you can see it's the result of government policy and actions.
Yeah, we on my programs, we refer to it as Munchausen's by government syndrome. They make the economy or the society sick and then insist they're the only ones who can fix it. And
Yep.
unfortunately, as conservatives, I've spent the better part of the last 2 decades warning people about letting the camel into the tent, and was always told, "Oh, Joe, no, these are good people, and we know these guys, and they're good friends of ours, and they're nice people, and they're just looking out." And now we look at where we are, and that's fine. I've always maintained that if Queen Elizabeth had been Queen of England in 1776, we'd be Canada because we reacted to a despot. But that's what happens. Is despotism is fine until there's a tyrant that takes over
Yes.
as a king. When the king is benevolent, everyone's happy, everyone's loving it. But as soon as that despot takes over, everyone wants freedom. And the thing is, we had it in our hand, and I think we can get it back. So let's pivot and talk about the book, The War on Ivermectin, because both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine were medicines that had been around for decades, treating many other diseases. But it's not as if this was the first time, Dr. Corey, that medicine had discovered that something we had been using for something else actually worked on a
Yeah.
current problem, right?
Yeah. So, and that you kind of crystallize, one of the main points of the book, right? So I called the book, the book is called The War on Ivermectin, the medicine that saved millions and could have ended the pandemic. But, you know, the way in which I think of that book is it's partly autobiographical because it traces not only my pre-COVID history, but a lot of the things I was involved in COVID as well as my organization. But in essence, it's a case study of a repurposed drug and how the pharmaceutical industry conducts wars on repurposed drugs. And it's not just about ivermectin. It's ivermectin is the case study, but
Mhm.
they've been doing this for decades. There was a war on hydroxychloroquine in 2020. Someone could have written that book. That would have been an equally compelling book because
Right.
they use very similar tactics. But there's been wars on cancer drugs, therapies for cancer, cardiology, psychiatry. They've been doing this for decades. I mean, an off-patent repurposed drug is literally the Achilles heel of the entire pharmaceutical industry, which is one of the largest industries on earth and one of the most powerful in the United States. And so here comes ivermectin, which literally threatened a market that opened up overnight, which is probably north of 100 billion over the years
Mhm.
with the vaccines and Paxlovid and molnupiravir, monoclonal antibodies, remdesivir, the billions we've spent on all those things.
Right.
Ivermectin threatened all of them. And what they did is they conducted what's called the disinformation campaign. And I invite your listeners or viewers to just Google the disinformation playbook. And there's an article written by the Union for Concerned Scientists back in 2017, which outlines the tactics that industries deploy when science emerges that's inconvenient to their interest. And I'm going to tell you, Joe, there's no more inconvenient science than the evidence of efficacy of ivermectin.
Mhm.
And they destroyed it. They pulled out every trick and tactic in that playbook. And that the tactics are named after American football plays. So it's called like the fix, the fake, the diversion, the blitz, the screen. And there's definitions and case examples of each and every one of those tactics. And I'll tell you that when ivermectin, you probably know that I gave testimony on ivermectin, which kind of went viral
Mhm. Mhm.
around the world, and
Oh,
it,
yeah.
it brought ivermectin to the lips of many across the world. And I couldn't figure out what was happening because when I brought forth that science, I stupidly thought it would be warmly received. I mean, myself and my colleagues, we really thought like things were going to be different now.
Right.
And that's not what happened. And I couldn't figure out. I smelled pharma. I knew that
Yeah.
there was some corruption. I just didn't understand the scope and the scale. And nothing made sense to me for 3 months. And one day I woke up I was checking my email and I got an email from a Professor William B. Grant. He's one of the most published researchers on vitamin D in the world. Didn't know who he was. He wrote me an email. He said,
Mhm.
"Dear Dr. Corey, what they're doing to ivermectin, they've been doing to vitamin D for decades." And he included a link to that article I mentioned. And I clicked the article and I just thought it was a curious email. And I read the article and it was like light bulbs or fireworks went off in my head. Suddenly, everything made sense. I
Mhm.
realized that myself and my colleagues, we were on the front lines of a massive global war trying to destroy the evidence of efficacy of this drug. And they did every single tactic in that article. And I saw it. I knew examples of everything they were doing. It was like getting the teacher's edition to the world. And so, I would say the core of that book, and by the way, when I read that article, I don't know if it was the same day or within a day, but I made a commitment that I'm documenting this. I am
Mhm.
documenting this
Yeah.
for the world. I want to teach the world what they do when science emerges that's inconvenient to their interest. And I nailed them on everything. If you read that book, I take you through every single thing they did, how they did it, the people involved, everything.
Well, it reminds me, my organization that sponsors us, Government Accountability and Oversight, is founded by a fellow named Chris Horner, who did the same thing with the global warming hoax. He was
Mm.
there and published books, Red Hot Lies, Power Grab, Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming. But since then, as you have done, we've been chronicling all these places where this collusive behavior has been going on. The EPA director working with Greenpeace and solar panel manufacturers to lead policy, the same thing they're doing in the medical profession. Do we need almost an antitrust situation where we can put up a firewall? We have our famous separation of church and state. Do we need a separation of church, of business and science? Do we need, I mean, Eisenhower warned about it. That was part, everyone remembers his military industrial complex warnings, but he goes on to mention the educational and scientific industrial complex as well, Dr. Corey. And that's decades ago. And here we are. Do we need laws that forbid this kind of collusion, like almost like this injunction that started our conversation?
I think that would be one possible solution. Laws can be gotten around and they
Yeah.
can hide, I don't know that I have solutions, but the conclusion I've come to is that our information systems are completely poisoned. They've been captured. And and I didn't talk like this 3 years ago. I mean, I had to learn this really painfully in the last 3 years. It was
Mhm.
quite a rapid kind of awakening. But like, I can't trust conflicted sources. And so much of major media and medicine and everything, it's all conflicted sources. I mean,
Mhm.
the newspapers are literally run and advertised by pharma. The medical journals are run by pharma. And I mean,
But if science existed in the sense that it should, pharma can make its pitch. It can say, "Hey, try this, whatever we've come up with." But if the medical field says, "Well, no, but the ivermectin is just as effective or more so, and at half the price," well, then in the marketplace of this kind of science, I don't have a problem with the pharmaceutical company saying, "Hey, this is great, it works." But then if science is actually allowed to do what it does and come up with real comparisons and say, no, actually, that doesn't work at all, or it doesn't work as well as this thing we can give you for $5. That's where we are. That's what we need to get back to.
well, we do, but the problem is the funding sources. They only study certain things. And what I outlined in the book is, in particular with ivermectin, there's 97 trials, controlled trials of ivermectin and COVID. The summary analysis of them, it's overwhelmingly
Hmm.
effective in reducing hospitalization, death, time to recovery. Now, there's a chapter in the book called The Big Six, where there's only six trials that most people have heard of. And the reason I call them the Big Six is they were very heavily funded. They were done by experienced researchers some of the biggest institutions, but they were unique in that all of the investigators were reeking with pharmaceutical industry conflicts. They all were designed to fail, and I outlined, and they were so brazen, the manipulations. But to go back to your point, it's like, you know the bias of the funders and what gets studied and how it gets studied. I mean, they literally designed trials to show that ivermectin didn't work. And those were the only trials that were published in major medical journals. All the other 96 never appeared. They rejected them. They would not publish positive trials of ivermectin. And those major trials that got published in major journals all ignited PR campaigns around the world. Every newspaper around the world blasting ivermectin found ineffective, ivermectin found ineffective. And so when you talk about science functioning, you would need unbiased funding. We would need lots of money to fund scientists who are free to study what they wanted, how they wanted. And we don't have that system. The funding is so tied up and controlled, and really it's generally biased towards looking at things that are profitable.
Yeah, well,
And
that's, I mean, that was always the premise behind the government getting behind some of this stuff, was that, oh, well, the Centers for Disease Control will keep it fair. As you said, back in the day when you thought the government was going to be the referee on the field, saying, making sure that one guy isn't cheating over another guy, and then somebody said, oh, but if we pay off the referee, that's a lot less people we've got to pay off.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing, right? That was, I always thought government was there to make things fair and direct us in good behaviors. But like you kind of mentioned before, when you concentrate that kind of power to do good, when it's taken over and captured by someone who's a malevolent force, we're at their mercy and we suffer greatly. And so, probably one of the biggest political lessons that I've taken out of these 3 years is that the answer is decentralization. Never
Amen.
do I want to exist anywhere the concentration of power is so great. Because you're right, if it's a benevolent force that's directing that awesome, a congregation of power, then great, everything's good. But there's not always benevolent forces. And right now it's uninterrupted, really corporate, corrupted interests that are running our government and our lives.
And if it's decentralized, sure, there may be malevolent actors, but you can go find the sanctified ones, and the malevolent ones will wither by the side of the road. Dr. Corey, where is the best place? And I always say go to COVID19criticalcare.com for the protocols, the protocols, the protocols, the protocols. Please look at these, especially if you know somebody who took the experimental jab or maybe had to keep their government-funded job. One of these days, Dr. Corey, I'm going to send you emails that I received from the University of Virginia Health System. They didn't send them to me. Employees there did, saying that the University of Virginia, scientific institutions supposedly, told their employees, we have to let you go if you don't take this shot, or we risk losing millions of dollars of federal funding. That was the science. It was political science. But this is so if somebody took the shot and they're worried about it, there are protocols. You have these amazing protocols for people who have long COVID and that kind of thing. Can they get the book at the same website?
So the book should be purchased either at Amazon or at ican.org. ICAN, that's Del Bigotry's nonprofit. Because the book is published on their imprint. But generally those two sources or bookstores. And then to learn more about how to treat COVID, particularly long COVID and vaccine injury, we have a kind of a protocol, a compendium of therapies at my nonprofit website, which is flccc.net, just easier to remember, flccc.net. And then for care, I have a private practice where I myself and my partner have specialized and worked for 2 years now in treating vaccine injury syndromes and long COVID. And we see patients across 50 states. That's the other thing that practicing under the Crow Indian tribe allows us to do is I don't need 50 state licenses. I can see a tribal member wherever they are.
That's right. Well, yeah, and the outfits are nicer if the movies were correct about medicine men. But Dr. Corey, I so greatly appreciate what you do. I appreciate your time. You guys at the frontline COVID-19, Dr. Sheila Fury here in Virginia, who's tried to lead the charge here for us on your behalf. You mentioned Del and Aaron Seary. Both are going to be on this program from Freedom Fest. If you guys are out there, please stop by Media Row. I don't know if you guys have time to be in Memphis for Freedom Fest. I know that it's going to be a busy time over there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have to miss. I'm lecturing. I'm going on a lecture tour in Hawaii for a bunch of doctors and across the islands there about.
That's a tough gig.
Yeah, isn't it tough, Joe?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pierre Corey. And again, Amazon, the book, can we get it on the screen one more time? The War on Ivermectin, Dr. Pierre Corey. And please pick it up. Buy 3 or 4 copies. Send them to friends there as well. Dr. Corey, thank you so much again for taking some time out with us this afternoon.
Thank you. My pleasure. Appreciate it.
And thank you. Remember, the whole point of science is that it's not settled. I don't care whether it's pharmaceuticals and prescriptions or innovative uses of old medicines or essential oils. I don't care. You should be free to find the medical treatments you want to follow and not just do what some overseer says. And this is spoken by somebody whose mother passed away during the COVID-19 pandemic because nobody was allowed to investigate hydroxychloroquine. They misapplied it to my mother's case because they just said, well, it's something I hear. But nobody had researched it. Nobody had researched when, too early, too late. And I don't blame. It's not it. It is one of those things. But if we were trying to learn, then it's a whole different world. Again, thank you for all of us here at the Government Accountability and Oversight Group, govoversight.org. Support our cause. If you pick up some of Chris's books, they're a great read on what Dr. Corey was referring to, only applied to the energy and Green New Deal world as well. So thank you for joining us. And again, for all of us here at the Government Accountability and Oversight, so long, and thanks for all the fish.